Hello, everybody. Welcome to a vlog. I'm going to do a vlog about things that are on my mind. Um, a couple things. Anyway, what I'm going to talk about today is I'm going to talk about the ARC conference just for a minute. Then I'm going to talk about my latest obsession with sort of the World War II generation. I don't mean boomers and I don't mean war babies. I mean that generation that was born just at the cusp of the Depression and their experience through the war and their creation of sort of the post-war thing. But anyway, so the ARC conference, I there's a load of people I know that are there. I am struggling with some serious FOMO, fear of missing out, because there's just a great lineup of folks. I think a lot of people that I sort of like and admire, people I'd love to have a conversation with, just to spend some time with, are there. And it kind of stinks because as a teacher, it's really difficult for me to get places during the school year. And I would say as a prep school teacher, I teach at a boarding school, and so cause we're an old school boarding school, and we go to school 6 days a week. So I have been teaching Monday through Saturday for nearly 20 years. By the way, I am not driving, and I am not on my way to Boston to pick up somebody from the airport. All right, I'm just sitting in my car, talking to the camera, as it were. At any rate, I keep going here. But the ARC conference, I mean, I don't know, I have my sort of skepticism about the ARC idea. It's a Jordan Peterson thing. I think it's the Alliance for Responsible something or other. I can't remember what the C means at the moment. But at any rate, it's Jordan Peterson and Jonathan Pajot is sort of part of it in a kind of strange ancillary way. Um, it's kind of like IDW folks, I think, a kind of center right, sort of, I don't know, kind of normie-ish. It's like I feel like all those kind of guys were used to being part of the mainstream, and then in the wake of, I don't know, Trump and Brexit in 16 and the weird year zero of 2020, the consensus sort of fell apart, and some of these folks were called, the IDW, the intellectual dark web, um, but that kind of fizzled out too. But anyway, that's not really my point. My point is that I would really love to have been there in London. I've been to London a couple times. I really like London. It's a pretty cool place. It's kind of an international place. I really prefer Oxford, as my friends on X, Twitter know. But anyway, the long and the short of it is that they are all there, and I am here in Rhode Island doing my thing, which I always do, which is I teach classes and I teach old books, and so the fear of missing out is a real thing. Um, so, some more personal news. Just last week, it was actually on my birthday, I finally got a piece published on Unheard about what I call the new migration, although that title did not last through the editorial process. It was inspired by a tweet observation that I had made that really kind of blew up. It really blew up on X, and it was just this observation that when I first started here in prep school, like I said, as a teacher at a boarding school, New England, about 18 years ago, people were really obsessed with college admissions then. And while folks remain obsessed with college admissions, and I don't see that changing much, to be honest with you, the focus of the students has shifted. And what I observe, and again, this is anecdotal, but I have done some research for the piece. My anecdotal observations sort of are merited by the by the data. Is that New England students are moving south, and my claim in the piece, and I didn't get to it too much, but my claim in the piece is that is due in large part with the changing focus of the Ivies and the Ivy adjacent. And what I mean by the Ivy adjacent are kind of like NESCAC schools, New England liberal arts schools that, were sort of it's where everybody went. It would be like unheard of for a student to leave the comfy environs of the New England establishment to go south. And with increasing frequency, students are moving south. And I believe in part that's due to the fact that a lot of these colleges just don't want them. As you might imagine, I teach at a very lovely and amazing boarding school, and you have to have lots of money to go to a boarding school. And just by the demographics, that tends to mean, upper middle class and upper class dual working professional moms and dads who have several kids, a few kids, a couple of kids, and they want the best opportunities for their children, and so they send them to prep schools. And so those kids tend to be white. The next demographic is Asian, both international Asian and Asian American students. And so those are the two demographics that the admissions folks in these major colleges and universities, these prestigious ones, have made a decided effort, although it is a little bit of a black box. They would never actually tell you how they make their decisions, but they made a decision to sort of do a different thing. And I think a lot of my students and their parents are getting the memo. And so 20 years ago they knew, but they thought they could kind of like jam the system and gain the SATs and do the resume stuff and build their way into one of these nice places. But now, honestly, if you don't score in the top, I don't know, 2-3 percentile on the SAT, you really don't have a shot. But anyway, I'm digressing from my larger point. The larger point that I was making in the piece, that this is going to have some pretty serious long-term demographic changes to the country, I believe. And we'll see how the arms race shakes down, and because colleges are going to be in a little bit of a pickle here shortly because they are running out of kids. The demographics do not favor a boom time for our colleges and universities in the United States. So it'll be interesting to see how everybody plays the game. The southern schools are really doing quite well, relatively speaking. They are among the cohort of schools that are actually growing right now, and also drawing from New England, East Coast, but also from the West Coast. I know I have a lot of friends who live out in the Los Angeles area, and the UC systems have become completely corrupt and in many respects really difficult for like the standard issue white kid to get into. And I really am kind of uncomfortable making this a race issue, but it is. I didn't make it the race issue. The university systems have made it so. And so in year 2020, when everybody went absolutely bonkers with the DEI stuff, the colleges were right front and center with that topic. And so we're really not messing around. And they're doing some pretty serious social engineering. But I think the downstream effects, the knock-on effect, the unintended consequence of that is you're going to have a lot of people who are going to go elsewhere. When you're not wanted, you make certain decisions that work for you and your family, and I see that with increasing frequency. So anyway, it's super cool. I get to it's a pretty I have a lot of respect for the Unheard platform. One of my all-time favorite current writers is Mary Harrington, and she writes for Unheard, so it's pretty cool to share some space with some of these people I admire so much. There at Unheard. So anyway, I know that she's there at ARC along with like Rod and my boy PVK Paul Vanderklay is there, and all of the usual suspects that I like to hang around with online. So they're there, and I'm not. And one of the reasons why I'm not is that I'm a teacher, and teachers, we have a nice break at Christmas. I get a nice break here coming up in March. But when school's in session, I'm in session. I really don't have vacation time as such that I can select. But in the summer, because I'm a full-time teacher and I'm not an administrator, my summers are mine, and I love that. That's pretty cool stuff. But so when they have these conferences that are in the middle of the school year, it's just like there's just no way that I can realistically make it, um, because really it puts undue pressures on my colleagues because they have to cover my classes and I have to cover my practice schedule, all that kind of stuff. It can be anyway. It's just too much. So fear of missing out really. All right, now let's get to this mid-century thing. This is an idea I've been chewing on now for the better part of a year and a half, I guess. But what has triggered this most recent round of thinking is that I have rewatched recently the 10-part HBO miniseries Band of Brothers. I first saw it a few months after it originally aired on HBO back in, I believe, 2001. Uh, Lots of things have changed in that time. I got married, I have kids, everything. At the time, I was living out in Los Angeles. But at any rate, I loved it then, and I was curious as to how it might stand up. And it's really fantastic. If you have not seen the series, I highly recommend checking it out. It's on Netflix right now, and you could do worse. It's basically an hour and 10 minutes per episode. Cinema quality. I mean, it is the real deal in almost every way. Um, and it follows a group, the Easy Company, in the 101st Air Division of the Army, Airborne Division of the Army, as they train. I believe it's in North Georgia, and then they make their way from North Georgia. And of course, it's hilarious because their commanding officer is an absolute. He's just terrible, and he's played by David Schwimmer from Friends. So it's actually pretty cool. But anyway, I always say that. At any rate, all right. So it follows them from their time in basic training to their special training. It follows them to England as they're waiting to drop on D-Day. They go to D-Day. They go through all of that. Then they go up to, I believe it is Belgium, no, Holland first, and then into Belgium, and then into France, and then all the way they make their way all the way to the Eagle's Nest, Hitler's famous um, mountain retreat. And it's just an amazing story, really amazing. But at times it is absolutely harrowing. I mean, it is just gut wrenching. And the power of film, the power of great TV, great storytelling is you care about these guys, right? And you care about when two of them get blown up in a foxhole at Bastogne. You care because their best friend, as a trio, their best friend, what's his name, Malarkey, is left, and it follows them when when they go through all of the stuff they go through, and it goes all the way to the end. And anyway, watch the show. Anyway, so I was thinking about those guys, and they tell you, of course, at the end, like what they do after the war. And one guy went back to Providence, Rhode Island, near where I'm from, where I live, I should say, and he's a mailman. And then one guy goes back to New Jersey and takes over his family's chemical company, and another guy, goes and becomes a prosecutor in Los Angeles, and another guy goes back to Oregon, and you follow all this sort of stuff. And I was thinking to myself, I teach boys and girls who are, 17, 18 years old, and I'm looking at the kids that I teach, and I'm looking at these kids on screen, and I'm like, how would this experience form you? I know it might sound a little bit, well, yeah, of course, dummy, it's going to change you. But I don't know, I was just really, really hit this time around because, I, when I was 18 and 19 years old, like, life was easy. I mean, like, biggest drama I had is like, can I get tickets to go to Lollapalooza? Hat tip, I did, the first one. And that was sort of the drama in my life. My drama was like, oh, am I going to be able to take that class that I need for my major? will I be able to get through the course registration platform in time? Like these are the kinds of things I'm thinking about. I'm not thinking about, oh, my best friend just got his leg blown off, or oh, two of my buds in the company, got blown up yesterday. Like it just, so that stuff is wild to contemplate. And those guys came back after the war, and those emotional experiences must be deeply informing, and clearly they are. But the other part that I find fascinating is to be part of this massive rollout of personnel and material in the war effort. To be part of that machine must just be absolutely incredible. And what struck me as I'm watching Band of Brothers is that it kind of creates two almost contradictory things in them. There's a kind of cynicism that is involved because the higher ups, don't know their butts from a hole in the ground, right? So that's a major through line, that they're stuck with bad, officers because the higher ups are taking care of their business in different ways, and so there's a kind of cynicism that sets in with these enlisted guys, these infantry guys, these guys who jump out of airplanes. There's a kind of cynicism that is involved with being in the military. But at the end of the day, like, you beat the Nazis, like, you won. You were part of this ridiculously, just incredibly impressive effort to 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 win, and you beat the SS. You beat the Nazis. You overcame the Wehrmacht. You won, and that's not nothing. So this incredible machine is erected in order to win the war, and that invariably affects your belief, your ability to see that engineering and American ingenuity can change the world. It can do amazing things. You start to believe both at the same time, both in the kind of the cynicism of higher upper management, the generals and the whatnot, but also that you can kind of get this stuff done. And so you take that spirit and you kind of believe that you can manage the world. And I think a lot of people believed that, both inside the military, but outside the military too. And so then the other movie that I've been thinking about, I've been positively obsessed about this movie for a really long time, is this movie called The Good Shepherd. And I believe it was Robert De Niro's directorial debut, and he's in it briefly as General Sullivan, the early architect of the OSS, which became the CIA. At any rate, the movie features Matt Damon, and he is a kind of scion of a WASP family, which has a kind of tragedy at the center. Um, but he becomes involved. He goes to Yale and gets selected to be in the Skull and Bones, and gets selected and chosen really to be part of the OSS, or sort of the prototype to the OSS, before the United States of America got involved in the war officially. So he was sort of out there in a sort of serendipitous fashion in England. But anyway, he's involved in the OSS and spy and espionage work, and then comes back home after the war and establishes himself as part of the CIA. Anyway, so it follows that whole trajectory, so from the war and into the Cold War. And I think that's an underrated and under-talked about phenomena, that so much of what we are dealing with right now are the sort of the unworked out contradictions of that generation. So this period of time from roughly, 19, well, 30 to 1960, or maybe 1933 to 1963. If you want to cap it at the Kennedy assassination, because I think that's a pretty good part. But anyway, just been thinking a lot about the way in which that order, that world order that was established through the victory of the United States and the Allied powers over the Nazis and over the Japanese and the Italians, has really been an impressive accomplishment, but it's fraying and fracturing and pulling apart as we speak. And I think that has deep implications for, the way that we approach the world, our inherited biases, our belief in progress and science and all those kinds of things are embedded, I think, and covered over in some respects because, we won the war. The fact that we won the war covered over, a lot of, a lot of bad stuff, I think. A lot of things that, we see playing out just even now in 2025. So, not sure what to make of it exactly, but I have quipped on other podcasts before this idea that, perhaps it's the case that we didn't really win World War II, that nobody really won World War II, that in the end, everybody kind of lost. And, I do believe that. I don't take away from the impressive military defeat of the Axis powers in 1945, but I often think, that in order to slay that dragon, you have to sort of become a dragon. And then I think about what are the implications of that, today even, that how do you put the dragon back in his lair, to kill the metaphor? How do you put that genie back in a bottle? How do you go back to your mail route in Rhode Island after living through Bastogne? How do you live a life after you've liberated a death camp? How do you go back to being normal? And, the answer, of course, is that you don't go back to normal. There is no normal. That horror becomes, in many respects, your normal. I don't think it's surprising that the guys who won the war came back and had the children who created Woodstock. Woodstock, in many respects, the counterculture, and that's a whole complicated issue too. Maybe one of these days, I'll get into that, the nexus between the counterculture and the CIA, but maybe that's for a different time. But, the boomers came from something. And as much as people like to crack on the boomers, they lived with fathers. They lived in a world created by fathers that had some serious demons. Had some serious demons. And what effect does that have? I remember in high school, actually, I read this book by the keyboard player in the Doors, Ray Manzarek, I think is his name. And it's a book about his dead friend and lead singer for the Doors, Jim Morrison. And Jim Morrison, in many respects, is sort of the quintessential, boomer. And his father was a naval commander, I believe, and famously did not get along with his father. They had beef from the get-go. And, I remember reading that book, and, obviously it's told from the perspective of one of his fellow bandmates, but, it's not nothing. to live with a guy, with a man, with a father who has seen death at that level and at that scale. You know, how do you going to become a sort of chippy, happy-go-lucky, wrestle on the ground with your kids kind of dad when you've seen that kind of stuff? And the old adage, war is hell. That hell is in you. That's funny. It's kind of like it's kind of like Satan in Paradise Lost. But the hell is within you. You carry it with you, and unless you are seriously devoted to expurgating and getting rid of those demons, I could imagine that'd be a tough slog growing up in that context. Tough slog. So anyway, the boomers lived in the world that was created by the fathers who had won the war, and they came back with all of their stuff, and in many respects sort of passed it on to their kids. And so anyway, I maybe the theme of this grandpa video, this grandpa style vlog, is be merciful, but be truthful, right? I mean, we can trace these threads. I think it's important to trace these kind of cultural threads as we try to make sense out of everything. And so much of the confusion that I see all around me, politically, culturally, and academically, and all of the things, right? Religion, churches, is the unwillingness or inability or the ignorance of the forces that created the world that we inherited. And I think that is always the challenge for every generation, is how do you manage a new consensus, a new synthesis, right? Because all of us are born into a world that we did not create, every generation. And so part of the work of each generation is figuring out what created the world, keep the good, alter the bad, redirect the course of the future. The other day I did a 10 good minutes on Chesterton's fence. But it actually came out pretty well. I went up doing a follow-up on sort of vertical video. I was trying something for TikTok and it came out pretty good. But anyway, the Chesterton's fence idea is that before you tear something down, figure out what problem it was designed and erected to fix. And I think that my beef with the boomer generation is that there was a lot of wrecking going on and not a lot of, very little attempt to understand what created the world that they were rebelling against. And when we act in ignorance, when we act rashly, you start not only recreating the conditions of old problems, but you even run the risk of creating new problems. And I've just been thinking a lot about that meme, Chesterton's fence. And the idea, as I've said in the other video, is two guys are walking in the woods and they come across a fence, and one guy's like, man, let's get rid of this stupid fence. It's not doing anything. And the other guy's like, well, what's the fence for? And so I guess I am on team the other guy, right? The guy who asks the question, But as I said in that other video, it's not an invitation to do nothing. It's an invitation into sense making. It's an invitation into what I think is wisdom. And offense is oftentimes an experiment, a problem-solving mechanism, a technology of a previous generation to solve a problem. And if we rip it up too quickly, then chaos can ensue. And I think perhaps the history of the boomers is in large part that, tearing down a bunch of things without fully appreciating the need to replace what you tore down with some other structure. So So I'm going on for about a half an hour now. I probably should put this one away. I want to apologize for the shaky camera. Like I said, I am new to this whole thing. I'm kind of trying out a bunch of different things, and I thought I had a place to sort of put a camera in a steady position. I was wrong, but at any rate, everybody take care. I'll post this and leave comments. Let me know if there are any kind of videos that you want me to make, any kind of books you want me to talk about. After all, I'm the old books guy, the great books guy, and until then, take care.